So you want to know which is the best 42-inch OLED, which is going to be better for your usage. I'm going to run through the top 5 comparisons between the two models to help you decide which one to buy. Number 1, connections. The LG C2 has 4 HDMI 2.1 ports. Now that's great for connecting modern games consoles, Blu-ray players and external devices, but unless you've got a very modern graphics card, then you will be struggling with HDMI 2.1 being the only option available. HDMI 2.1 only appeared with the NVIDIA RTX 3000 series of cards in late 2020, and a little bit later on for AMD cards in 2021. So if you've got an older system, you're going to be limited to HDMI 2.0 connection, or you're going to need to buy a new graphics card. HDMI 2.0 will work okay on the LG C2 for 4K resolution, but only at 60Hz and with 8-bit color depth. Or, if you want to, you can drop the chroma level to a low 420, and that'll allow you to reach 120Hz refresh rate, but this is going to have a noticeable impact on your picture quality. None of this is ideal as you can't take advantage of the full 4K 120Hz 10-bit capabilities of the screen if you're going to be using HDMI 2.0. Keep in mind you're likely to need to invest in a modern graphics card in order to get HDMI 2.1 and then be able to use the screen at its full potential from your PC. The Asus, on the other hand, has got an added DisplayPort 1.4 connection. This uses Display Stream Compression, or DSC, to allow full support for 4K 120Hz 10-bit color depth without necessarily needing a super modern graphics card. Display Stream Compression on DisplayPort has been around for a lot longer. For instance, since the NVIDIA RTX 20 series of cards released in late 2018. You're still going to need a graphics card that supports DSC to get the most out of the screen, but including a DisplayPort connection makes the PG42UQ a lot more accessible really to a wider audience of PC users. The screen still has 2 HDMI 2.1 and even 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, so you have always got that choice for your PC if you've got a modern graphics card, or if you just want to connect external devices like games consoles and Blu-ray players and that kind of thing. One additional consideration is that the Asus has got some USB data ports like you would have on your PC. So this includes a USB upstream data connection, and it allows you to plug in peripherals like cameras, mice, keyboards, USB sticks or whatever, just like you would into a PC port. The LG C2 on the other hand has got USB ports, but the screen lacks the PC upstream connection. And so the ports can only allow external playback of content like videos and photos from a USB stick. You can't use those ports like you would on a PC. If you're looking for a screen primarily for PC usage, then I think the Asus has got the edge here. It's far more accessible, it's easier for older systems. Obviously, if you're going to only be using it for external devices, games consoles, or you have a modern graphics card with HDMI 2.1, then these things are going to be less important to you. Number 2, gaming. This is going to be one of the key considerations for the screen, no doubt. You know, with both of the panels being OLED, they offer the near instant response times, the excellent contrast ratio, the excellent black depth that you would expect from this technology. There's actually very little to separate the two when it comes to pixel response times. We measured a 0.49 millisecond grey to grey average on the Asus and a 0.6 millisecond grey to grey on the LG, both with no overshoot. Both of these have got what we would call elite level response times. The Asus has a slightly higher refresh rate at 138Hz compared with the 120Hz maximum of the LG. Obviously that's not a massive difference, but every little does help when it comes to motion clarity and frame rate support, so the Asus has the slight edge there. Variable refresh rate support is the same on both models. The LG features a black frame insertion mode, which can help reduce perceived motion blur, although disappointingly this is only available at 60Hz on the C2. For some reason LG have removed the support for this at 120Hz, which was available on some of their older OLED TVs, and was really where this feature excelled the most. The 60Hz BFI mode works pretty well though, if you're gaming at a low refresh rate, but it's likely more useful for external devices and consoles and that kind of thing. From a PC, you'd really want to be pushing the higher refresh rate of 120Hz, in which case BFI becomes irrelevant. Asus haven't introduced BFI at all on the PG42UQ, so if you're a fan of those motion blur reduction backlights, the LG certainly wins there. The input lag of the LG varies depending on which user mode you're using, with the game optimizer mode bypassing a lot of the internal image processing to reduce lag very nicely. It's lowest at 120Hz as it is on the Asus, and would be considered good, although the PG42UQ is even lower since it was designed as a monitor and it doesn't have any of the added image processing that the LG has. Being designed as a monitor allowed Asus to optimize the performance for lag as they would with their normal gaming monitor lineup. On the LG, the game optimizer mode is also very inaccurate by default, but it can be nicely adjusted if you follow our settings guide shown on the screen now. Being designed as a monitor, the Asus also features a range of familiar on-screen display settings like crosshairs, FPS counters, stopwatch, timer and sniper mode, which some people may find useful for PC gaming. For console gaming, there's not really much to separate the two. Both screens support a full 48 gigabits per second HDMI 2.1 connection and include 4K 120Hz, HDMI VRR and auto low latency mode. The LG does support Dolby Vision gaming, whereas the Asus doesn't, but that's about the only difference when it comes to consoles. All in all, I think the Asus has got the slight edge when it comes to PC gaming, but if you're more interested in console gaming, then it's a lot closer and the LG probably has the edge in that regard. Number 3, HDR. Now this is going to be another key consideration for the screen. The per pixel dimming of OLED is obviously going to be great for HDR content, helping to avoid all the issues with blooming and halos that you might get on other technologies. The LG has a wider support for HDR standards, including Dolby Vision and hybrid log gamma, whereas the Asus, in an effort to avoid the additional licensing costs that would have impacted the retail price, supports only HDR10. If that's important to you for gaming or video content, then the LG has the edge here. It's nice to be able to take advantage properly of content that is specifically mastered in these formats. For instance, Netflix, which has HDR content in Dolby Vision, and modern games consoles like the Xbox Series X, which can also support Dolby Vision gaming. So it is a bit of a shame that that's not supported on the Asus. The LG also includes further image processing options for video and HDR, including things like dynamic tone mapping. And while this might not be as true to artistic intent of the content, it does give a nice boost to brightness and makes HDR images pop even more. In side-by-side comparisons of the two screens, dynamic tone mapping made a decent difference, we thought. The Asus has a better peak brightness than the LG, being able to reach 793 nits at a normal 6500K colour temperature. You can push this higher, but it's going to be at the cost of a much cooler image. The LG, on the other hand, reaches a more modest 717 nits at the same 6500K. The LG can sustain a slightly higher brightness level for larger bright images than the Asus though, but for bright HDR highlights on a smaller screen area, the Asus has the edge. Stick around till number 5 when we're going to talk all about the screen coating. We know that's going to be important to people, and we'll talk about whether that has an impact on HDR experience, contrast and that kind of thing. For HDR content generally, we think that the LG has the edge here. Number 4, office use. Now maybe you want to use a screen for something more than just gaming and movies. Maybe you want to use it for web browsing, office applications. How do the two screens compare then? The LG is going to be more restrictive here, primarily because of its annoying auto static brightness limiter technology. So this will detect what it considers to be static images on the screen, or at least an image that isn't changing very much, which is going to happen quite a lot in desktop usage. When it detects that, the screen will be dimmed, and you'll notice this quite easily and regularly during office applications. Now, you can't turn this off on the LG screen from within the main menu. You can access it via the factory menu, but then you're going to run into all kinds of warranty support risks and that kind of thing. On the Asus, you have access to turn off this feature from within the main on-screen display, so immediately that makes the screen far more accessible and usable for office and static type usage. The Asus display provides a small tilt range. Now it's not particularly wide, but it does allow you to adjust the screen to be a little bit less vertical in feeling than the LG, which I found to be pretty restrictive in this area. The text clarity on both screens is basically the same, despite Asus's odd claims on their website about the new screen being somehow better. It's using the same panel, the same pixel structure, the text clarity is basically identical on the two. The anti-glare coating that we will discuss more in a moment is definitely better on the Asus, helping to avoid reflections and making the screen more comfortable in what we would consider to be normal daytime office type usage. Both screens can be configured to a common brightness level such as 120, 150 or even 200 nits and be used without the screen needing to dim because of the ABL feature. Asus did have to fix that with an early firmware revision, but it does work nicely now on both screens. You do need to enable the uniform brightness mode on the Asus, but both screens can work nicely for desktop and office use in this regard. Finally, when it comes to screen and colour accuracy, the LG has got the slight edge here. It has a slightly more accurate sRGB emulation mode, which is likely to be very useful for these kind of uses, with a better gamma, grayscale and colour accuracy. The Asus was good still, but not quite as accurate. And the LG does have a more accurate appearance after calibration as well, something which proved a little bit problematic for some reason on the Asus. The LG C2 also supports hardware calibrations, so that is going to be very useful if you have a compatible device and software, although that is of course going to add to your cost if you want to use those features. Overall, I prefer the Asus for general and office applications. The matte anti-glare coating is more suited to office environments and avoids all those reflection issues that you get on the LG C2. And the ability to turn off the auto-static brightness limiter from the menu was a lifesaver without needing to worry about voiding my warranty and all those kind of issues that you might have if you wanted to disable it on the LG. Number 5, deep breath. Screen coating. Right, we know this is going to be the most controversial area when deciding between these two screens. The LG has got a glossy panel coating, so it looks more like a TV. It provides a clean and clear image and makes colours and blacks pop a little bit more than a matte anti-glare coating. However, because the screen is glossy, you do have to worry about reflections a lot more, so you need to be more careful with the positioning of your screen relative to windows, lamps and lighting. It's a lot more tricky to do this in a desktop office environment than it might be if you were using a glossy screen as a TV in a dimly lit lounge at night. You know, keep in mind that you're going to be using the screen in the daytime in an office type situation. On the other hand, the Asus has got a traditional monitor anti-glare coating. This does a really good job of eliminating reflections, reducing reflections that you'd get from the LG, particularly in daytime office usage and in well-lit rooms. Now we know that some people don't like the matte anti-glare coating. You know, it can have an impact on the perceived contrast ratio and black depth of the screen, and it can sometimes make the image look a little bit more grainy when you're using it up front. It's not as clear and crisp as a glossy coating. Now the loss of black depth and contrast ratio could be considered a major problem on something like OLED, which is well known for its excellent contrast ratio. But actually this is only really going to be a problem if you're using the screen in a well-lit room. If there's lots of lights around, the panel coating can diffuse the light and starts to make the blacks look a little bit more dark grey in appearance. Keep in mind the same thing happens to other monitor technologies, so the same thing can be said for IPS, for VA, for TN film panels. You're still going to get the benefits of an OLED panel. It's still going to deliver you better contrast ratio than those other technologies, but you do lose some of that black depth if the lighting in your room is quite bright or in the kind of positions that would cause it to be diffused off the panel coating. If you can control the lighting in your room, or you're going to be using it primarily in a darker room, then I don't think this is a huge problem though at all. The alternative, of course, would be to have a glossy panel coating, and some people would argue that that is going to help avoid that loss of perceived contrast ratio. Now that of course is true, but at the same time you're then going to have to contend with the possibility of reflections on the screen, which can be as equally damaging to your perceived contrast, your visual experience, your viewing experience. You still have to be mindful of your lighting and your room setup if you're going to be using a glossy screen, so either way you're going to have to be careful of that. You're going to want to either avoid the loss of contrast on the Asus or the issue of reflections on the LG. If you're going to be using the screen in a well-lit room and you're going to have to contend with windows and lights, then I think the matte anti-glare coating of the Asus is likely to be preferable to the glossy coating of the LG, taking a small hit to the perceived contrast ratio in favour of reducing reflections. When it comes to HDR gaming and videos in a dark room, there really is no visual difference between the two screens at all. We compared them side by side and there was nothing to separate the two. And for an OLED screen, it's ideal to try and use them in a dark room wherever possible anyway. So if you're going to be using them in that situation, then there really is no concern about the coating on either screen. The same could be said for a very dimly lit room, which is probably what you're likely to be using for nighttime movies and gaming. But it's true that as soon as the room brightness starts to increase a little bit more than that, you might start to see some of the drop in the contrast ratio on the Asus because of the coating. It's really hard to define exactly where this becomes a problem and at what point the contrast ratio starts to become impacted. But I would say that if you've got lighting that sits anywhere in front of the screen and it becomes anything more than what I would consider dim, then you're likely to start to see some of those blacks start to look a little bit more dark grey in appearance on the Asus. But at the same time, there's going to be a point at which reflections on the LG start to become a problem. Now, it's not at the same cutoff point as when the contrast starts to take a hit on the Asus. The room needs to be a little bit brighter still, but it's what I would consider moderately bright. You know, the reflections then start to become distracting, and that in turn impacts your perceived contrast ratio and your visual experience of the screen. If the room becomes anything more than moderately lit, then I think you're going to have issues with reflections on the LG that are just as problematic. If you're primarily going to be using the screen for gaming and HDR content at night and in a dark room, there really is nothing to separate the two screens there. I wouldn't be worried about using either of them in those kind of situations. If you're going to be using the screen in a dim to moderately lit room, then the LG probably has the edge here. You're going to avoid the issue with the drop in contrast ratio that you might get on the Asus, but it's not going to be entering the realms where the reflections start to become too much of a problem. If you're going to be using the screen in a well-lit room and you're going to have to contend with windows and lights, then I think the matte anti-glare coating of the Asus is likely to be preferable to the glossy coating of the LG, taking a small hit to the perceived contrast ratio in favour of reducing reflections. If you're going to be using the screen more like you might a TV, you know, in a darker lit room, a moderate to dimly lit room, and you're going to be using it for gaming and multimedia more, then the glossy coating of the LG is likely to be preferable. From a performance and capabilities point of view, I think the simplest summary here is probably also the most obvious when you consider what these two screens were designed to be for. The LG C2 is probably the better choice if you're going to be using the screen like you would a normal TV. If you're going to be viewing it at night time, in a dimly lit room, in a dark environment, and you're mainly interested in gaming and movies, particularly if you're interested in HDR and you want the additional HDR capabilities, support, and image processing that it can offer. If you're wanting to use the screen more as a PC desktop monitor, then you're going to need a high-end graphics card to be able to power it properly. But also you're going to have to contend with some potential issues with the screen being designed primarily as a TV. Those would include the glossy panel coating, the OLED protection features, the limited stand adjustments, and the limited connections from a PC point of view. Let's not forget that this screen was designed to be a TV, so it's going to do better in situations where you're going to use it like you would a TV, rather than if you're using it in a monitor type environment. The Asus, on the other hand, is designed to be a monitor primarily, and it excels more in those areas. You've got the matte anti-glare coating, you've got the ability to turn off the OLED protection features, a slightly more adjustable stand, and a range of PC connectivity options that make it more accessible as a desktop monitor. It can of course still handle gaming and movies perfectly well, but it's probably more suitable if you're looking at PC gaming, or you're going to be using the screen a lot in moderate to well-lit rooms where the coating is more appropriate. If you're using the screen more like you would a desktop monitor in a wide range of different situations and environments, then it's going to be a more versatile and flexible option than the LG C2 would be. The final consideration, of course, is going to be price. The LG C2 was launched in early 2022 at a retail price of around £1,400 in the UK, the equivalent in dollars in the US. That's come down quite a lot now, so you can readily find the C2 for around £950. The Asus is yet to be fully launched, but it's expected to retail for the same £1,400 retail price that the LG did when that was released. So at the moment, there's going to be an initial £450 price difference between the two models. Now that's going to be hard to justify for a lot of people, I'm sure. That price is likely to come down in time as well. You know, it's going to adjust just like the LG did. But right now, the decision on whether you can justify that additional cost is really going to come down to what you can afford to spend. And of course, what your wife is probably going to be willing to let you spend. Let us know in the comments section below which screen you're thinking of going for. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask them there. Please give us a thumbs up and a like if you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe for future videos and updates. I'll leave useful links and information in the description below. Thanks for watching and see you next time.